Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. This is Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. It's been a lovely morning already. I tend to get up early and do my warm-ups and my workouts, and I feel fresh and ready to go. How about you?
Good. It's been getting cold here on the East Coast. It was below 40 degrees when I left the house this morning, so things are getting a little chilly on the East Coast here in DC, but you know, for this Hawaii boy, I don't like it. It's not good. It's no good for me. I like warmth. You know, I always have my heater on in my office, and I can't stand this cold, but that's okay. It's time's gonna pass. We got to do it.
I think it's funny how the body adapts because, I grew up in LA, so it was really never cold and could be quite warm. And when I moved out to just the Bay Area, I only moved in California, okay? But basically the average temperature went from like 80 to 60 in winters, they're not cold, okay? I know that. But, it gets to be like, 50, 60 during the day for a while. It took me at least 3 years to figure that out at all. I didn't know how to dress because, in LA, everything was acrylic. I didn't have any wool. I didn't have any fleece. I didn't have any down because I didn't need any of it. And sometimes like, okay, how do I dress? What do I do? Yeah, I understand that feeling of your body just adapts to whatever you're used to. And in your case, it has stuck with that adaptation for a long time.
It has not adjusted. My wife, it is so funny. I'll come in the house. It's AC set to 72 degrees. I put on a sweatshirt. She's walking around in a jog bra, and we're looking at each other thinking, really? I'm shivering at times, and she's sweating and says, something's not right here. Something's,
right.
And, our bodies that's just the way it is. Yet I wouldn't do without AC, mind you, but it's just, you get used to what you're used to. And everybody keeps saying, but you've been in DC for how long? It's like, well, over 20 years, but I think
the set point is what it is.
Yeah, I've actually read studies on it that says, where you're born, where you grow up, your body gets very used to that and it doesn't adjust. Not significantly.
And especially Hawaii's range of temperatures is like tiny.
Yeah, it is.
It's like when I used to go to Hong Kong all the time and I would watch the temperature and it's going from 72 to 85 all year round.
Yep.
So, not only is it just adapted to warmth, but adapted to a very small range of temperatures, compared to DC, which goes like whoop to boop, it goes all the way up and down the scale.
Yeah, it was 85 degrees a few days ago.
Right.
And I think right now it is 55 degrees, and that was 2 days ago. So there's a 30-degree shift middle of the day. So that's a big shift. That's a big shift. So last night I reached out to you and I'll say, what do we want to talk about today? What do we really want to focus in on? We just covered the shoulder, and when you texted me back, I was like, oh yeah, we should dive into this one. And today we're going to be talking about, go ahead.
The sacroiliac joint.
Yeah. And especially those with, instability in that area.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's one of the most challenging situations that I've had to deal with both myself and with clients. And I've been working with a couple of clients lately with it. So it's just on my mind again.
Yeah, me too.
The challenges of it and how you kind of work your way to some version of stability and what things help you to get there, what pathways to explore. So we kind of want to go into that. It'll probably be another 2-episode situation. So I think we're going to start today with what is the SI joint? Where does it go? How does it work? What are the things to think about with it? And then probably go into more of the practical stuff in our second section. But before we go into the topics of the day, we have some exciting announcements. If you want to see us on video.
Yes.
Yes.
Live and in person, but
live and in
on
person.
video.
Well, live and virtual. There we go.
Live and virtual. There it is. There it is.
We're going to be doing 2 events. One is through Balanced Body, and this is going to be on November 8th, Friday,
Great.
from
Yep.
8 to 10 Pacific time. And that'll
Yep.
be enhancing your personal training with Pilates.
Yep.
So we will.
And that should be a lot of fun. We've talked about
Yeah,
this for a while, and that's where you and I have always sort of, whenever we've taught together,
that's where
it's
we
sort
go
of,
anyway.
yeah. And I try and explain in a Venn diagram, it's not a little bitty amount of overlap, it's a huge overlap. There's
Yeah,
a
and a little
lot
edge.
more.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I say, what's in between? If you have personal training on one side and Pilates on the other, what overlaps is called movement.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. It's like, that's really what we're talking about, is it's just about movement. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be, like you said, on November 8th and 8 to 10 Pacific on East Coast. Where I'm at, it's going to be 11 to 1. Should be a lot of fun. But 2 weeks after that, or a week and a half
On
even,
Yeah, on
on
the
the 17th.
17th, we'll be with our dear friend Erica Quest on Level Up Movement, which we're super
Yep.
excited about. Erica does a fantastic job
Oh,
of
yeah.
hosting her virtual events. If you haven't ever checked out her platform, please do. She's got amazing people on there, amazing opportunities for you. And that time we're going to be talking about sciatica. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
if I
It's
ever teach yeah,
the title is "Don't Risk Those Discs: A Deep Dive into Sciatic Pain," and we sort of have a series with her called "Don't Risk Those Discs," and it's about low back pain. We've had 2 sessions already. One was more of a Q&A, and one was a deeper dive. And then this is going to be more of a deep dive into sciatic pain. And what is it? What causes it? Is it a thing? Is it actually a diagnosis, or is it something else? So we're going to dive deep into that, and we'll probably do a podcast on that either around the same time or later on, so we can cover some of that kind of stuff. But that's going to be on November 17th from 9 to 10:30 Pacific time. So that'll be noon to 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. Doors open October 27th, so you can register after October 27th. And so about when this is going to be launching, we were looking at the schedule and saying, yeah, this will be right around that time anyway. So I think this launches on November 6th. So the doors should be open. In the show notes, we're going to put links to both of those. Also, go back into our social media. We're going to start blasting social media a little bit with all of this stuff. So look back in our social media. We'll have all the links in Facebook as well as Instagram. And if you like what we're doing, do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe button, follow us. Instagram, Moving Convos, movingconvos@gmail.com if you want to get in touch with us and say, hey. Also my YouTube channel, Brian Ritchie on YouTube, will take you to all of our episodes where you can see us, on video, where we record each week. So like today, we're going to have some anatomy models and things pop up on the screen. So if you are listening in your car, you think, I think I know what that looks like, but I'm not 100% sure. Jot down about how far it is into it. Go to the YouTube channel. You can fast forward to that part, or just listen on YouTube, especially if there's a language barrier. You can always put the closed captioning.
awesome.
All
Whew,
right.
that's a lot of
That's a
things to
lot.
talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually we just
Okay.
go
That
right
was the
into
show for
it.
today.
That's right. So the sacroiliac joint, right?
Yes.
The sacrum, where the sacrum meets the ilium, meets the
Yep.
pelvis. This is one of those areas where if it is stable and has some coherency and it's working well, you don't even know it exists. It just
I'm just
does
going to
the
say
right
that.
thing. Life is beautiful. You don't think about it.
Yep.
When it becomes either unstable, particularly when it becomes unstable, or becomes particularly arthritic or irritated in some way, you can't forget about it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's like in the middle of your body, every step, every movement, every whatever, every, sitting, standing, walking, running, putting pressure on it, sometimes even lying down, can put pressure onto it. So
Yep.
it is an area, and Brian and I were talking about this a little bit before we started. When we're working with clients with this issue, it's like, it just is a long thing. It's just
Yeah.
it's a lot of problem solving, and it's a lot of detail work in terms of refining their understanding and their awareness, and refining what exactly we're doing to try to help them stabilize.
Well, if anybody's ever had a sprained ankle, for instance, or an unstable knee or something like that, even for a little while, once you get it stronger and it
Yeah.
sort of shores it up, it feels okay. And
Yeah.
that's great. But the SI joint, because it affects your low back, because it affects everything around you, every time you move, every time you lift, every time you do anything, it is there and it gets angry. And it is a chronic issue for some people, a definite chronic issue. And it's something that, we're going to have to sort of deal with.
So with that in mind, I'm going to bring up a model on the screen. I know you guys are listening at home. I'm going to try to explain this. So if I look, I've got basically a model of the pelvis up. I'm hiding behind it as we speak. Hello. And the sacrum comes and meets the ilium. And I'm going to just show this for a moment. So the first thing I'm going to show is just that there's a little tiny bit of motion at that sacroiliac joint. Like that is a normal part of life. Again, showing that on the screen. Can you see that okay, Brian?
Yep, I got you.
Yeah.
I widened the screen for it.
Okay, good. So when you're walking, when you're putting one leg in front of the other, when you're stepping up a stair, when you're stepping down a curb, you're going to have just a slight rotation at those two joints on the two sides that allows the mobility to happen. It's a small amount of mobility. A lot of debate about how much there actually is, depending who you talk to.
Exactly.
But that's the crux of the matter. I know I'm disappearing. I'm grabbing my bones. That's where things get funky. And I'm going to take now two other models. So first, I've just got like basically a hemipelvis or half of a pelvis, which always looks really funny. These always look like kind of like a propeller to me, right? A little prop engine. And what I'm showing here is basically the ilium side of the sacroiliac joint. It's just like it's this rough, bumpy, lumpy kind of topographical map area in the joint, right, on the ilium that creates one half of our sacroiliac joint, the iliac side of the sacroiliac joint. And then to meet that, and I've got the sacrum up kind of on the screen, there are these little, what I call sort of like, they look like ears, and it's also called the auricular surface, which means ears. So there's like a little ear on the sides of the sacrum that are wider towards the top and kind of narrow quite a bit towards the bottom. And they're also, if you feel that with your finger, you can kind of see me feeling mine with my finger, it also is like a topographical map. It's lumps and bumps and ridges. And basically very different than our glenohumeral joint or our hip joint. And so when those go together, I've got the ridges and the topography of my ilium ideally matches the topography of my sacrum. So those two joints, those two funny surfaces come together and hopefully create some congruency, right? And some integrity. Now, that develops as we grow, right? So essentially those different contours of the ilium and the sacrum are created by how we walk and move. So when you first start to move around as a little guy, I just had a year and a half. No, sorry. I had a 21-month-old with me and a 3-week-old. So it's just kind of watching their move. And I've got a bunch of little kids in my life at the moment. And so it's been really fun to just watch them kind of grow and do what they do. But basically, as soon as somebody starts to crawl, starts to use their hips, starts to move their legs, you think about a baby belly crawling. Yeah. That's when you start to create the shape of that joint or those joints, right? The two sides of those joints. And then hopefully they're working nice and evenly and balanced, which nobody does, but that's our fantasy. And so you get nice equal support on both sides of that sacroiliac joint and nice even continuity and congruency of those two joints.
And if you think about how the pelvis works, like you said, one goes into more of an anterior-ish tilt and the other goes into a slight posterior tilt as we walk. And if you've ever seen children, when they first learn how to crawl, they first just sort of rock back and forth, very bilateral.
Yeah.
Everything's bilateral, just forward and back in that sagittal plane.
Yeah.
And then they begin to sort of propel themselves a little at a time with one knee forward, the other knee forward until they get it a lot smoother. And the same thing happens when they start to walk. You see them stand up and they can't really get that movement going.
Right. They waddle, right?
Yep.
Because they're not really flexion and extensioning. They're kind of just
Toddling.
toddling.
Literally.
Yeah. Toddling. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really when this stuff develops. And I've talked to a few people who have had issues developmentally who started walking before crawling.
Aha.
Or one person who actually said that they didn't really walk. They immediately went from standing to almost running. They said their
Oh.
parents said that they started out fast and just kept going. And it was sort of a, how's that possible? But that's just how their bodies developed. And
Yeah.
they've always had a little bit of issue with their SI joint in that it's almost as though they needed that crawling. And that's why if you talk to some developmental, physicians and whatnot,
Yeah.
they'll say the crawling is incredibly important. It's
Yeah.
important for that pelvic motion. We need that motion, to get our bodies moving the right way and for development.
And not to mention all the brain stuff that crawling does.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So it's critical for all kinds of elements. But that's really
Absolutely.
interesting. So yeah. So you can kind of see how crawling is going to develop those SI joints in a certain way and create some of that mobility without full load on it and in kind of a gentler way. That's right. It's a much less loaded situation. Half your weight's on your hands, the rest's on your knees. And you're also not upright yet.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's once we come upright for many things in our human existence that trouble occurs, right?
Yep.
Because our structure still doesn't seem to quite figure out how to deal with gravity in an upright situation. Right? It's very efficient in some ways. Like we can run faster and farther not faster, but farther than anybody because we're very efficient. But it doesn't mean that structure works really well for everybody.
Yeah.
All right. So the SI joint is also a weird joint because it is not a pure synovial joint.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think about a synovial joint being like a femur and an acetabulum. The femoral surfaces are coated with hyaline cartilage. The acetabulum's floated with hyaline cartilage. There's a little joint capsule that keeps synovial membrane or synovial fluid inside that joint.
And a lot of movement.
And a lot of movement. Right. Exactly. And there's a huge amount of mobility there for sure. But here, so the sacral surface, so the surface on the edge of the sacrum, that little ear that we talked about, is lined with hyaline cartilage, right? Which is thick, flexible, and usually found in mobile joints. Yeah, so that's kind of that's our sacrum. And then the ilium surface is different. It's lined with thin fibrocartilage, which is basically usually present in places like the symphysis pubis and is designed to create stability. So it's basically a kind of cartilage that's in places that don't move very much, whereas the cartilage on the sacrum is designed for movement.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of says that this joint is not really sure what it's doing. It's kind of schizophrenic. It's got two different viewpoints of what it's supposed to do. One is for stability and one side is for mobility. And again, there's very little movement here, depending who you talk to. I've heard everything from, I've heard it so many different ways. I'm not even going to mention how many different ways I've heard that there's mobility of that joint, but there's not a lot of mobility there and there shouldn't be. Right? Ideally, there is just enough to allow full movement of the femur, allow force to transfer smoothly from the femurs through the pelvis, up through the sacrum, and then up through the spine. And to transfer evenly.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I often think about with sacroiliac joints is what I'm looking for is balanced mobility and stability on each side. So in other words, if the two sides are moving at this roughly the same rate in roughly the same directions, we don't usually have trouble. Right. Oftentimes when we have trouble is when one side isn't moving much and one side is moving too much. Right. So you've got stability on one side, mobility on the other, and that just creates stress and often can create pain and discomfort anywhere up and down the chain. It can be in the low back. It can be in the hip itself. It can be in the hip joint. It can be in the SI joint itself. It can be down in the femur. It can be in the knee. It can be in the foot. Like anything in that whole chain can get affected.
Yeah. And that's what I see often in my practice, in my study, is you see one that's what I refer to as stuck and one that's mobile, because the stuck side really does not want to move anymore. And that
Right,
side is just, it's not locked, but it just doesn't want to move. It's overly stable.
right.
It's overly stable. And the other side has to compensate by doing way more than it should. And that instability on that side is what can cause a world of problems.
And the pain can show up on the unstable side or on the stable side, depending. It can go both ways. So one other thing to say here is, based on some cadaver studies and things, the sacroiliac joint will often fuse, auto fuse. So in other words, it just merges and gets stiff sometime in 50s, 60s, something like that. So oftentimes people lose mobility entirely in the sacroiliac joint as they age. Now, again, who knows what time that happens? And some people stay mobile forever and some don't. There's a
Mhm.
lot of options there. And sometimes what I think about there is, I was an acupuncturist and actually went to acupuncture school in downtown Oakland, where I live, or when I was in the Bay Area. And so I would walk around Chinatown a lot, buying herbs and things like that. And I would watch the elders of that community walk. And it was like they had no mobility in their pelvis, and you could see it.
Mhm.
And you'll see it this, here we go, that there's that sort of shuffle where there's not a lot of hip extension. There's not a lot of mobility and a very small gait range, right? They're not moving their feet very far. And oftentimes I'm thinking, okay, that for them, probably that SI joint is fused and is no longer moving.
Yep.
So, again, just that range. And then again, some people are just really tight their whole life on one side and very loose on the other side.
And also positioning of the SI joint, the entire
Yeah.
pelvis,
Yep.
but also when we're talking about the sacrum itself, if it's tipped at all, that can be another issue. So there's a lot of different things that can occur in that stability or instability of the pelvis.
Right. One example I sometimes use here, I had a client who was the owner of a large greeting card company. So she had to do a lot of social events. And when she stood very posteriorly tilted. She kind of locked back in her knees, tail was tucked under, pretty flat lumbar, pretty flat sacrum. And when she'd go to a party or whatever, she said she would get really pain pretty much in the SI joint. So hers was kind of easy to identify. Um, After about no more than 10 or 15 minutes, she started to feel a lot of just pain and
Mhm.
discomfort. And I said, okay, so what I want you to do next time you're at a party is stick your butt out. Like basically, don't tuck under, kind of anteriorly tilt a little bit, lean get your weight more towards the ball of the feet, off the heels, and let your back arch a little bit. And she came back like a week later and was like, oh, I tried that and I could stand for like 45 minutes or an hour without my back hurting.
Yep.
So that's the other thing too there is that, remember, the force goes right through those sacroiliac joints. The
Yep.
weight of your body is carried on that force compression. We'll talk about this a little bit, but that compression of the sacrum wedging into the ilia. And so if that is in a funky spot, or maybe you've got some arthritis in that area and you're putting pressure on it because of the position of your pelvis. In her case, she just had to change the position of her pelvis and her pain went away.
Yep.
So that was an unusually successful moment, just to be clear. but that told me a lot about, just again, how pelvic positioning directly influences the SI joint.
Well, we see that a lot too when we see
Mm.
people who are used to wearing flats, used to wearing tennis shoes, something like that, and then all of a sudden, for an event, they go into wearing
Yeah.
high heels.
Yeah.
Uh, and we're not talking about a 1 inch, we're talking about, these 2 inch plus sometimes
Or
because,
even
they
a
feel
1 or a 1.5 inch. Doesn't have
for
to be a
some
super
people,
stiletto.
no.
Like, doesn't take a lot always, but yes.
I see a lot of people who all of a sudden go from 0 to 50, and so
Got
all of
it.
a sudden they're in a 2 inch heel or more, and it immediately puts them into an anterior tilt. There's more compression on the spine. They've got a new, their sacrum is tipped forward, and suddenly they have a lot of discomfort and pain in their low back. Well, first of all, you're going into a position your body's not used to. but all those muscles are really trying to figure out, what the heck are you doing to me? Where am I supposed to be? And you're
Mhm.
asking them to stay there for a long period of time. So we see that those changes can make a huge impact on someone that could linger, especially if someone suddenly gets a new job and suddenly they're, at more events, or they have to stand for longer periods of time.
Right. Absolutely. So thinking about that, we talk a little bit about some more specific things. So one is just, what are the movements here and kind of what are they called? And how does the pelvis move naturally? I talked a little bit about walking, but let's talk about some other things too. Um, there's there's a specific terminology of the sacrum and the ilium, the sacrum and the ilium, and there's called the sacrum nutates and
Mhm.
counter nutates. So nutation of the sacrum means that it nods forward. So in other words, it's going to increase your lordotic curve. It may anteriorly tilt the pelvis if it's taking the pelvis with it, but basically its nutation is going to directly affect how the low back works, and also just how those joints function. Counter nutation is more that tucking under, like I was talking about with my client. That tailbone comes under. It's really like you're tucking your tail. And these are small movements. These are not like
Mhm.
your shoulder. These are just tiny little slightly nodding forward. That's nutation, means nod. So the top of the sacrum moves down and forward, or forward and down. Or we've got counter nutation where more the top of the sacrum moves back, and the bottom of the sacrum moves in. So that's nutation and counter nutation, which directly influence how the spine sits on top of the sacrum and everything else.
Now, maybe you could help clarify this in my brain. I've always thought that nutation is when the sacrum actually tips forward in its own joint, not necessarily an
Yes,
anterior tilt to the whole pelvis. It's where
correct.
that sacrum itself sort of jars itself forward, tips forward in the joint, causing that joint that already isn't a seamless joint like the shoulder joint or the hip joint where everything fits nice and snug. It's already a little loose, but now it's sort of in a position that it doesn't want to be. And the counter nutation is within itself, again, a posterior, nodding backwards or a tucking under within itself, not necessarily bringing the pelvis with it. The pelvis can be in its
Correct.
normal orientation. Okay. I just wanted to
Correct.
make sure that in my own brain, I was looking at it the right way. Okay.
Yeah, and I wasn't that clear in my explanation. So really understanding that the sacrum can move, as we just talked about, slightly independently of the ilium, and how that does that can influence again how the spine moves and how those joints are influenced. Now, the sacroiliac joint is stabilized two different ways.
Yes.
It's called form closure and force closure are the two different terms that are used. And these have like really directly to do with how the sacrum sits and wedges into the ilium.
Yep.
So again, I've got my pelvis up on the screen, and basically that sacrum really does wedge in between the ilia. You can kind of see it
Mhm.
more from the front here, right? It's just like it's wedged down in there, and the ilium compresses around it, and that's called form closure. Right, that's just the structure of the ilium and the sacrum and how those go together. They interlock to create a certain amount of stability.
So think like a puzzle piece, two puzzle
Yeah.
pieces that were designed for one another. They fit. And if you ever played with these independently, if you have a disarticulated skeleton, like everybody does around the house, like we do, and you take those together, there's a point at which it sort of clicks into place. That's like,
Yeah.
oh, this fits.
Yes.
And that is like two puzzle pieces fitting together really nice and snugly.
Yep. And you can see here, I'm just going to again, I have my pelvis up on the screen. I'm just opening and closing it, creating a gap at those joints or creating more integrity at those joints. Right. So just I'm opening it and closing it a bit. So that's called form closure. Then we also have force closure. And that is really the role that the soft tissue, the muscles, the ligaments, etc., play in holding that together.
Now, I also have heard that force closure also involves, and especially in the standing position, the upright position, gravity.
Yes, thank you. Yes, exactly.
Because that basically where you're holding it right now, you look at it looks like a keystone in an archway,
Mhm.
that it's wedging itself down and gravity is sort of pushing it into position so it'll hold
Mhm.
itself into place.
Right. And so that's that keystone piece, that form closure, that force closure, and gravity has a big thing to do with that. Oftentimes, if you're on all fours, for example, thinking about our previous crawling example, right?
Mhm.
Force is not going through those sacroiliac joints the same way. Gravity is
Yep.
not loading them in that upright position like it would be in standing. Instead, you're like this, and that those joints can have a little more mobility, and there's not anywhere near as much stress on them. It's not going through
Mhm.
the body the same way. So, right. So there's form closure and force closure.
Yep.
And then we look at like what does stabilize the SI joint, because for better and worse, there's not a lot of muscles that cross that joint and really, like you think about a knee joint, right? It's got the quadriceps going over it. It's got the hamstrings going over the back of the joint. It's got the gastroc coming up around the side. And it's got all kinds of muscles around the joint crossing over the joint
Mhm.
to stabilize it, right? Same thing with the hip or the shoulder. That is not true in the SI joint.
No.
So you kind of have muscles. Here's my, again, I got my, sorry, I know I'm using a lot of visuals on this, guys, so feel free to grab the YouTube thing. Right, so you've got muscles here that do several things. You've got muscles that go from the ilium, like our gluteus maximus, that go
Mhm.
from the ilium out to the leg, right, down to the femur. You've got muscles that come down the spine. The multifidi is really the primary muscles that are down into the sacrum, is the multifidi, going from the transverse processes, or what would be transverse processes in our fused sacrum, to the spinous processes. So that's got some stability there, but those are joints that aren't mobile anyway.
Mhm.
So those have a little bit of ability to kind of connect into the ilium. On the inside of the sacrum, you've got the piriformis, everybody's favorite, one of those troublemakers, the bad boys, one of the bad boys of anatomy, I often call it, right, which connects onto the outside of the sacrum. So this is my sacrum right out here. So it's going to influence the movement of the sacrum,
Yes,
and
big time.
big time. And in some anatomy books, they talk about it connecting somewhat to that SI joint in the front and or a little bit in the back. So it may have some connections with piriformis across that SI joint at sort of the bottom part of it. Again, just debate on that. So I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility. But otherwise, and this for me is the crux of the matter in sacroiliac joint issues. The sacrum is the victim, if you will. I'm using very negative language here. Is the victim of everything that's happening above that. So any
Mhm.
imbalances in the erector spinae, in the deep spinal muscles, in the abdominal muscles, in the iliopsoas, in the iliacus, and all the muscles that attach to the hip. Gluteus maximus, medius, minimus, all of our deep rotators, abductors, adductors, quadricep, hip flexors, hip extensors. All of those are going to influence how that pelvis sits. Does it sit slightly rotated one way, slightly rotated the other way? Does it sit slightly anterior or anterior on one side, posterior on the other? That's what's going to influence to a great extent how that sacroiliac joint is moving or not moving, and how it is being supported or not supported.
Mhm. Now I have a question for you that just sort of went through my brain. How does the thoracolumbar fascia affect this? Because it sort of comes down and it connects all of the muscles from the back into the glutes and hamstrings and crosses around that area. Nothing that's sort of surrounding it like a belt, like an SI lock belt would go around the pelvis and lock it together. But how does that necessarily affect the function or stability of the SI joint? Or is that kind of unknown?
No, the thoracolumbar fascia, right, is well, there's many layers of the thoracolumbar
Right.
fascia, but some of those layers come all the way, again, from one lat across the thoracolumbar fascia to the opposite glute, crossing over the SI joint in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the thoracolumbar fascia is fascia, so we still have to look at the muscles underneath that for their
Right.
activation.
Right.
But certainly fascial imbalances directly can affect the sacroiliac joint for better or for worse, depending.
And that's one
Right.
reason why we train the muscles above and below, because
Right.
we want to sort of like a belt or suspenders or something like that. We're trying to pull that in to be tighter from both sides to create that additional stability within the SI joint itself. And we can do that
Right.
through the fascia by like I said, attacking above and below the musculature.
Right. So typical, so that's kind of in a superficial. I want to go a little bit deeper too. There are some sacroiliac ligaments.
Yes.
There are some ligaments that cross the sacroiliac joint in the front and also in the back. So the ligaments are a part of that stability system. But remember that ligaments create their mobility based on how we move as children, essentially. And our ligaments and our joint structure don't fully solidify until we're basically done growing. So sort of late in adolescence, sometime in there. So for example, I'm going to use an example I use a lot. If I've got somebody who, let's say, is a hurdler, okay, they run hurdles. So I picture somebody who, now a lot of hurdlers only have one leg going forward every
Yep.
time. That's
Yep.
a typical, now some will do alternating, but most of them don't. They're just like, I'm a right leg, I'm a right leg, I'm a right leg. And I remember working with somebody who was a high school, high level competitive hurdler. That's a really funny word. Sorry, it's gone totally bad on me. But anyway, and so they were doing that from their teen years up through college, and they created an imbalance in their pelvis because of that heavy duty unilateral side. So they were really mobile on one side, they're pretty stable on the other side. And because of their activity, they had changed the shape of their ligaments. So ligaments are no longer necessarily providing the stability that they would have had that person done something a little less extreme, a little more bilaterally symmetrical.
Sure. Our bodies respond to whatever we do to it on a regular basis. So, especially when we're young. So, even though two people spend most of their time in the pool, one's a diver and one's a butterfly swimmer or a breaststroke, their fascial suit is going to be completely different because you're asking it to do two completely separate things, even though both occur in the pool.
Yep, exactly. And that's just something important to know. Like whenever I'm dealing with somebody who has an asymmetry of any kind, I always say, hey, what did you do as a kid?
Yeah.
Were you a diver? Were you a swimmer? Were you a dancer? Did you play baseball? Were you a pitcher? Like, what did you do? Because that will often give me a clue as to how that myofascial suit, if you will, got built, and give me some clues as to the roots of that asymmetry or that imbalance.
Yeah. Now, I've always sort of in the back of my head thought that the stability of the SI joint really is determined by those ligaments and that ligament structure, because that is the only thing that's really crossing that area on the closest, where we're talking about right bone to bone.
Yeah, at the joint.
Holding it together. That's really what's holding the joint together. And when you look at them, and I highly recommend go online, take a look and see how many ligaments there are. This is like a spider web. There's ligaments going from here to there and everywhere, holding everything together. So it shows you how important it is, but it also shows you why those ligaments are so needed, because we don't have that muscular structure outside of that holding it together through muscular force.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, there's like I will picture up on my screen. It's like, oh yeah, there we go. There's one there. Yeah. So there are lots and lots of ways that is held together. So when we think about the sacroiliac joint, common causes of instability are situations, again, where somebody has built instability into the system because of a sporting activity. That's not uncommon at all. A lot of my dancers have mobility that way. Again, the hurdler that I worked with, people that tend to do things very one-sidedly, whatever it is. A lot of my pitchers, like you think about a baseball pitcher, and you think about there's just some really funky stuff in terms of how they get their force going. Were you a pitcher, Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty one-sided. Not just in the upper body, but all the way through.
Lower body. More lower body than anything else.
Yeah.
You look at Roger Clemens, for instance, during the steroid era, his lower body was massive. His
Yeah.
legs were huge. And you wouldn't think that looking at a picture, but you're pushing off the mound, you're pushing off this piece of rubber, and you're pushing as hard as you can, generating all your power from the ground up. And your arm and upper body literally become a whip rather than what's propelling it. The lower body and core are what's propelling it.
Yeah, the arm just delivers it. It delivers
Yeah.
the force developed by the lower body. Yeah. So, so again, what people do is the other things too are things like imbalances in the pelvis. So let's say somebody has a leg length difference or a
Yes.
scoliosis. Those will often also cause a sacroiliac joint issue because, again, the pelvis is not held in a balanced way in that whole myofascial structure, that whole biotensegrity structure, all the muscles need to support area,
And
right? If there's an asymmetry in that.
Absolutely. And we see that also with people who have ever sprained one of those SI joint ligaments, who've caused some, from a fall, an auto accident, or what I see a lot of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I've asked many of my clients who have SI joint issues, multiple pregnancies.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first pregnancy, and my wife was one of these as well. After the first, relaxin is released into the body, hormone relaxin, which causes the ligaments to stretch, which allows baby to come out. Kind of important. You kind of need that.
Good thing. Yes.
Good thing. But when they go back, not always do things go back nice and neat. And I find if they've had one child, often they'll go back pretty good. But with 2, 3, 4. So when I've had a client who says they have a very unstable SI joint and they have 4 or 5 kids, I'm like, well, that kind of explains a lot to me.
Yeah.
That didn't knit together the way it probably should have over time.
Absolutely. One other thing, this is a little random, but this gets into another way that the SI joint is actually stabilized. At one point, I was doing a pelvic floor class, and I think I was in, or was it Netherlands at that point? And we were talking about the effect of an episiotomy, which is a tear or a cut of the pelvic floor during pregnancy to increase the opening, right? So the baby's head can come out. And we did a random survey of us and all of our clients in the room, and women who had an episiotomy often had sacroiliac joint issues. Now, it could be from pregnancy, I don't know. There's a lot of things happening there. And they often had the episiotomy on the side, or they had the instability on the side that the tear was towards.
Interesting.
So anyway, that was just a random group. That's completely not scientific, everybody. So don't take that for anything other than a random moment. Okay. But with that being said, yeah, pregnancy for sure. You get that pelvis in a completely different place, which anybody who's been pregnant, it's like, where is my pelvis and what is it doing is a mystery. And every week it's kind of different. And then how does it come back together, or does it come back together? Also, women generally are much more prone to sacroiliac issues. I've had 2 men, and I've had many, many, many women with SI joint issues. And again, that's because of that relaxant. It's because of, even on a monthly basis, and there's a lot of debate about this. Yeah, there's a lot of debate about this, but there is a theory, which is, again, people prove and disprove right and left, but that women also have a relaxin cycle during every month. So there's a little more relaxin, I believe, during ovulation, and then it decreases. So that our ligaments get looser and tighter on a regular basis. This does not happen for men. You guys have like ligaments that are just here. That's really helpful. I want a stable ligament. I've always been like slightly jealous of the ligament that just goes, yep, this is as long as I'm going to be until you like tear me or do something terrible to me, right?
Yep.
But women have these much more slightly flexible, which means slightly unstable ligaments at all of our joints. And one theory is that this is why women are much more prone to ACL tears, because the rate of ACL tears, especially in athletic women, is like way higher than men for the same amount of activity. And so there's just that idea that the ligaments are just a little less stable, a little less coherent.
Yeah. So those ligament structures really play such a valuable part to the stability within the pelvis. And I've had a number of people, and like you said, women way more than men, but I have had a couple of men who have had very unstable, but it's usually caused by trauma,
Yeah.
by
Car
a fall,
accident.
a car accident,
Yeah.
something like
Slip
that.
on the ice.
Yep, that causes something to go out and to sprain that ligament. Much like your ankle, those ligaments stretch, overstretch, and never quite get back to where they were before.
Exactly. Now, with that being said, we've talked a bit, at least indicated that the pelvis is stabilized by, all the abdominal muscles, the muscles above it, and the muscles below it. One other thing to think about is the pelvic floor, which I was bringing up
Mhm.
indirectly with my, the discussion about pregnancy and the discussion about the episiotomies. Because if you think about it, the pelvic floor you can think about as holding the pelvis together from the inside.
Yep.
Right. And sometimes the analogy that I use is you think about a building. And again, I've traveled a lot, and you go to Europe and you see buildings that are held together by what are called flying buttresses, right? These big arches that hold the walls up from the outside, because the walls, after about 3 or 4 stories, you can't hold that up with just masonry. You need some kind of support. So for a long time, there's that external support. And that's my image here. Then at one point, I think it's Chicago, but I could be wrong, they said, hey, let's put rebar,
Yep.
let's put little metal struts inside concrete, inside the building, and suddenly they could go, infinite number of stories high. So I think about the pelvic floor as often being that rebar, that
Yeah.
internal support for the pelvis. And when I've had clients who, again, either through pregnancy or through, anything else, have an unstable SI joint, the pelvic floor is often part of both the troublemaker and something I can work with to try to bring that pelvis stability from the inside.
Yeah. And next week, when we talk about the actual practical application, we're going to get into more of this. Now, we haven't done a show on the pelvic floor yet, but that's coming. That will be coming up because that's an animal in and of itself that,
Yeah.
but you're absolutely right. I love the idea of it being rebar, and I've taught the same thing for years. You're creating the stability from the inside. So that
Mhm.
that force closure can also be from the inside, pulling everything together. And while it's not crossing the SI joint, it's affecting the pelvis and the sacrum together. It's affecting it, holding it together. So it's a great analogy thinking about how it's being held from the inside.
Yeah, you think about the levator ani. Again, pelvic floor is not everybody's cup of tea, and most of you probably know what I'm talking about. But there is a muscle. There is a muscle
Right
called
over
the
their head.
levator ani, right? That sits inside the pelvis, kind of creates the bowl of the pelvis, and the muscles attached from the front of the pubic bone along the wall of the obturator internus, and then attach back to the rectum and into the coccyx. So it really connects the front, the side, and the back of the pelvis from the inside. And I often really will think about that image of that. And then when that draws together, it can again compress those SI joints, create stability of those SI joints from the inside.
Yep. Yep. And there's a number of muscles of the pelvic floor that do that, that pull the SI, that pull the issue tuberosities together, that pull the sacrum toward the pubic bone. And it really
Yep.
does create all those muscles when they are working and they are in tone. They do help pull everything together properly, which gives you
Mhm.
greater support.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Just kind of creates that. Again, it's like I sometimes think of it as like a drawstring bag,
Hmm.
right? When the bag is loose, it's not holding anything together, but I tighten up that string and right, it pulls it together from the outside. If you think about like a drawstring in the center of a ring, right?
Mhm.
That's what the pelvic floor can sometimes do.
Yeah. And if you think about, that's really what if we were built ideally, we would have a drawstring, like if you think about a pair of pants with a drawstring around the waist.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful if that's what we had, that we could just tighten that up and pull the pelvis together, and it would be nice, almost like a weight belt, just and suck that together. And hey, my SI joint feels a lot healthier now, feels safe, feels secure. Unfortunately, we don't have that. So
No,
we,
no, people would be like SI belts and things that are kind of just like and I honestly, I haven't found that they work all that well for most of my clients. They're awkward and but they are a way to kind of help get some of that going. If they're helpful, they're helpful. And sometimes they
Right.
are and sometimes they're not. But
I've
that's
I've had a few people that really it's worked out wonderfully for.
great.
But again,
Great.
the problem is it's a lot like crutches. It's a lot like a knee brace. Eventually you have to be without it. So you need to strengthen anyway. It's fine when things are really unstable and you really
Yeah.
need to just get out of pain
Yes.
and get out of that pain cycle and get out of the inflammatory cycle. It's fine then, but you really need to focus on what do we do about it? How can we strengthen this area? And how can we create that internal sort
Yes.
of drawstring with all the muscles that we have? Because let's face it, we have a lot of muscles in that area that while they're not necessarily surrounding that joint, they're around it and they will be affecting it.
Yep.
And when we get to our practical application next week, that's really what we're going to be focusing in on is what do we do about this? How can we draw that together? And how can we create that internal stability?
Yep. Absolutely. That's where we're headed, folks.
Yep.
So anything else you want to say?
No,
So
I
to
think, yeah, I think we
okay.
covered a lot.
All right. So kind of to wrap up, we really did look, and feel free to look at the YouTube on this because it was
Yeah.
showing a bunch of stuff. But basically looking at where that instability comes from, the fact that that joint is designed to be stable with a little bit of mobility. That's the joy of it. That's what it's supposed to do. Form closure and force closure, how it stays stable from the outside,
Mhm.
from the inside. Um, what can cause sacroiliac joint issues? Again, any asymmetries can often lead to stress building up there. And if any of you have sacroiliac joint stuff, give us some questions and comments in the comment section because we love to
Yep.
answer those. And if you do get some specific questions, we'll try to answer those in our next episode. We talk more about practical applications. Um, this again has been one of my trickiest areas to work on. I've had
Mhm.
to Brian was talking about earlier, said some success, but I've had success as long as I keep a client in a fairly you have to put it well in a box, keep them fairly
Mhm.
contained in terms of a lot of things. Moving outside of that box, getting into more full body free movement can sometimes be where the challenge comes in. And it's like I've had to take like half a baby step
Right.
for like weeks and then another half a baby step to see if they can tolerate that extra stress on that area and maintain that stability. It's a tricky one. So
Yep.
hopefully we'll give you some tips next time.
And if you have any tips or tricks, feel free, email us, put it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you because, like I say, we're just two people who have a lot of experience in the area, but we're not alone in this. A lot of you have worked with this before, and I'd be very curious to find out from you what worked with your client. And again, keep in mind, what works with one person is not going to work on everybody, but it may help someone out there. So please put it in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. Or if you want to stay anonymous, you can always email it to us. We'll keep you anonymous and just let everybody know, what your ideas are. We'd appreciate that. And if you like what you hear and you're enjoying us, please hit the like and subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it. Or leave us a 5-star rating. That'd be great. That helps the algorithms. And on social media, when you see us pop up, do us a favor, do some comment of some kind, because believe it or not, all those comments make a huge difference in how it pops up on other people's feeds. So we really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If there's nothing else, Nora, I think that's it for this week.
All right. Thank you guys. See you
We'll see
next
you next
time.
time. Bye.